Some marriages die with a bang, explosive fights, dramatic affairs, or bitter custody battles that leave emotional wreckage in their wake. But other marriages die with something far more insidious: the slow, steady erosion of respect that turns lovers into adversaries and passionate partners into polite strangers. This is the story of how one couple found themselves living as roommates in their own home, where physical intimacy had vanished completely, and where being right had become more important than being happy. It's also the story of how they found their way back to each other, one small choice at a time. Jennifer Walsh stood in the driveway of their split-level home in Maple Grove, Minnesota, her face flushed with anger and her hands clenched into fists. She had just spent the entire car ride home from their neighbor's barbecue, explaining to her husband Michael why his opinions about local school funding were completely misguided. Now, as they prepared to walk through their front door and pretend everything was fine in front of their 8-year-old daughter Chloe, Jennifer felt that familiar surge of frustration that had become the soundtrack of their marriage. "You just don't get it," she muttered under her breath as Michael fumbled with his keys. How can someone with a master's degree in psychology be so completely wrong about educational priorities? Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He'd learned over the past few years that engaging with Jennifer when she was in this mood only made things worse. Instead, he focused on getting them inside, so they could retreat to their separate corners of the house and avoid any more conflict for the evening. This scene had played out countless times over the past 3 years, ever since Jennifer and Michael had become what they privately called the couple who disagrees about everything. It hadn't always been this way. When they'd met at a community theater production in downtown Minneapolis 7 years earlier, their differences had seemed charming, even exciting. Jennifer, a sharp-witted high school English teacher, was drawn to Michael's gentle nature and thoughtful approach to problems. Michael, a child psychologist who worked with troubled teenagers, admired Jennifer's passion and intelligence. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of shared interests and deep conversations. They both loved hiking the trails around Lake Minnetonka, trying new restaurants in the Twin Cities, and spending weekend mornings reading the newspaper together while drinking coffee. Michael made Jennifer laugh with his sense of humor, while Jennifer challenged Michael intellectually in ways that made him feel more engaged with the world around him. The trouble started small, as it usually does. A disagreement about which candidate to support in a local election. A debate about whether organic food was worth the extra expense. Different opinions about how to discipline their neighbor's unruly children. At first, these discussions felt healthy, even invigorating. They were two intelligent people sharing their perspectives and learning from each other. But somewhere along the way, the discussions had turned into debates, and the debates had turned into battles. Jennifer, accustomed to being the authority figure in her classroom, began approaching their disagreements like teaching opportunities. She would present her position with the same confidence and thoroughness she used when explaining Shakespeare to her students, complete with supporting evidence and logical arguments. Michael, trained to listen and analyze human behavior, would respond with psychological theories and careful reasoning. What neither of them realized was that they had stopped trying to understand each other's perspectives and started trying to prove who was smarter. The real damage began when Chloe was born. Suddenly, their intellectual sparring wasn't just about abstract ideas, it was about the daily decisions that would shape their daughter's life. Jennifer, drawing on her years of experience with teenagers and her extensive reading about child development, had strong opinions about everything from sleep schedules to screen time to discipline strategies. Michael, with his professional background in child psychology, had equally strong but often completely different ideas about how to raise a healthy, well-adjusted child. When 8-month-old Chloe would cry during dinner, Jennifer wanted to let her fuss for a few minutes to teach her patience. Michael wanted to pick her up immediately and address whatever need was causing her distress. "She's manipulating us," Jennifer would say as Chloe's wails grew louder. "If we give in every time she cries, we're teaching her that crying gets her what she wants." "She's not manipulating anyone," Michael would respond, already moving toward their daughter's high chair. "She's a baby who's trying to communicate that something is wrong. Ignoring her doesn't teach patience, It teaches her that her needs don't matter. And there it was, the look. The look that said, "I can't believe you think that." The look that communicated, without words, that one of them was clearly wrong and the other was obviously right. Jennifer would see that expression cross Michael's face and feel her own features harden in response. How could someone who was supposed to love her look at her like she was stupid? What Jennifer didn't understand was that every time she corrected Michael's approach to parenting, every time she explained why her method was better, every time she sighed with exasperation when he handled a situation differently than she would have, she was communicating something devastating, that she didn't respect his judgment, his intelligence, or his competence as a father. From a psychological standpoint, what was happening in the Walsh household is one of the most common and destructive patterns in modern marriage. Jennifer, like many wives, had unconsciously assumed the role of relationship manager. She felt responsible for making sure their family functioned properly, which meant monitoring and adjusting Michael's behavior when it didn't meet her standards. This dynamic is particularly toxic because it strikes at the core of what men need to feel satisfied in their relationships: respect and trust. When a wife consistently communicates that her husband's decisions are wrong, his methods are ineffective, or his judgment is poor, she's essentially telling him that she sees him as incompetent. This creates a defensive response where the husband either fights back with his own criticism or withdraws emotionally to protect himself from further attacks on his character. Jennifer's teaching background made her especially susceptible to this pattern because her professional success came from her ability to identify problems and provide solutions. In the classroom, her students benefited from her expertise and guidance. But marriage isn't a classroom, and husbands aren't students who need constant instruction. When Jennifer brought her teacher persona home, she was inadvertently treating Michael like a child who needed to be educated rather than as her equal partner. The withdrawal began slowly. Michael started working later, claiming he had reports to finish or difficult cases that required extra attention. He began volunteering for weekend workshops and conferences that took him out of town. When he was home, he spent more time in his study or watching television by himself. Jennifer noticed the distance but interpreted it as further evidence that Michael wasn't invested in their family. "He doesn't even want to spend time with us," she complained to her sister during one of their weekly phone calls. "I'm doing everything around here, managing Chloe's schedule, keeping up with the house, planning our social calendar. Meanwhile, he acts like he's a boarder who just happens to live here." What Jennifer didn't realize was that Michael's withdrawal was a direct response to feeling chronically criticized and disrespected in his own home. Every suggestion Jennifer made about how he could be a better father or husband felt like an attack on his character. Every time she corrected his stories in front of friends or interrupted him to provide what she thought was more accurate information, she was sending the message that she didn't trust him to handle even simple social interactions correctly. The physical intimacy disappeared so gradually that Jennifer almost didn't notice it happening. First, their spontaneous affection faded. The casual touches, playful kisses, and intimate conversations that had once been such a natural part of their relationship. Then, their planned romantic encounters became increasingly awkward and infrequent. Michael would cite stress from work or exhaustion from dealing with difficult clients. Jennifer would suggest they needed to work on their relationship, or communicate better, which only made Michael feel more pressure and less desire. By the time Chloe turned 3, Jennifer and Michael were living like polite strangers who happened to share a mortgage and a child. They coordinated their schedules through text messages and brief conversations over breakfast. They attended Chloe's preschool events together and maintained a pleasant facade for their friends and neighbors. But in private, the silence between them was deafening. Jennifer found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Michael slept beside her, wondering when they'd become people who lived in the same house but never really connected. She missed the man who used to hold her hand during movies, who would pull her close when she was cooking dinner, who used to look at her like she was the most interesting person in the world. The absence of physical intimacy was particularly painful because it felt like a rejection of everything she was as a woman. Jennifer was attractive, intelligent, and successful in her career. She had male colleagues who clearly found her appealing and friends who envied her seemingly perfect family. But her own husband seemed to find her about as sexually appealing as a piece of furniture. She tried everything she could think of to rekindle their connection. She bought new lingerie and planned romantic evenings. She suggested they take weekend trips without Chloe, or have regular date nights. She even brought up the possibility of counseling, thinking that maybe a professional could help them communicate better. But all of her efforts felt forced and artificial, and Michael's responses were polite but unenthusiastic. What Jennifer didn't understand was that physical intimacy requires emotional safety, and emotional safety requires respect. When a man doesn't feel respected by his wife, when he feels constantly criticized and corrected, when he believes that nothing he does will ever be good enough, his natural response is to withdraw not just emotionally but physically as well. Sexual desire is closely connected to feeling desired, valued, and appreciated. Michael couldn't feel those things when every interaction with Jennifer felt like a performance review where he was always falling short. The breaking point came on a frigid January morning in 2024. It was New Year's Day, and Jennifer woke up feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Chloe was spending the night at Jennifer's mother's house, which meant they had the rare opportunity to sleep in and reconnect as a couple. Jennifer suggested they start the new year by making love, thinking maybe this could be the beginning of a fresh start for their marriage. What followed was the most awkward, disconnected physical encounter of their entire relationship. They went through the motions, but there was no passion, no real intimacy, no sense of emotional connection. Afterward, they lay in bed in silence, both acutely aware that they had just shared their bodies but not their hearts. Jennifer felt more alone than she had when she was actually single. At least then, her loneliness had been circumstantial rather than existential. The next morning, she went for a walk around their neighborhood, tears freezing on her cheeks as she passed the familiar houses and snow-covered yards of Maple Grove. She found herself wondering if this was what the rest of her marriage would look like. Two people going through the motions of being married while feeling completely disconnected from each other. The thought was so depressing that she had to stop walking and lean against a mailbox while she cried. Standing there in the cold Minnesota morning, Jennifer realized that something had to change. She couldn't continue living in a marriage where she felt unloved and unwanted, where every conversation seemed to turn into a conflict, where the man she'd once adored now seemed to see her as nothing more than an obligation. But she also couldn't imagine walking away from 7 years of shared history, from the home they'd built together, from the family they'd created with Chloe. As she walked back toward their house, Jennifer made a decision that would change everything. She was going to stop trying to fix Michael and start examining her own role in their relationship's deterioration. She didn't know exactly what that would look like or whether it would make any difference, but she knew that what they were doing now wasn't working for either of them. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Jennifer's first instinct, true to her nature as a problem solver, was to approach fixing their marriage like she would approach fixing any other challenge, with research, planning, and systematic implementation. She wanted to sit down with Michael and explain what she'd realized about their dynamic, apologize for her mistakes, and create a plan for moving forward together. But something stopped her from having that conversation, maybe because she sensed that more talking wasn't what their relationship needed. Instead, Jennifer decided to focus on the one person she actually had control over, herself. She started paying attention to her own behavior in ways she never had before. The results were eye-opening and more than a little embarrassing. In just one typical Tuesday evening, she caught herself correcting Michael's story about a difficult client 3 times during dinner, sighing with exasperation when he loaded the dishwasher differently than she preferred, and interrupting him to provide what she thought was a better answer when Chloe asked him about her upcoming field trip. "Good grief," Jennifer muttered to herself as she got ready for bed that night. "No wonder he doesn't want to be around me. I'm like a walking criticism machine." The hardest part was learning to keep her mouth shut when Michael made decisions she disagreed with. Her entire professional identity was built around providing guidance and correction. and suppressing those instincts felt almost physically painful. When Michael decided to let Chloe have ice cream before dinner because she'd had a particularly good day at preschool, Jennifer had to bite her tongue to keep from launching into a lecture about nutrition and appropriate reward systems. When he forgot to update their shared calendar with Chloe's dance recital date, Jennifer's first impulse was to explain why family organization was crucial for maintaining household harmony. Instead, she quietly added the event herself and said nothing. When Michael chose to handle Chloe's bedtime tantrum by sitting with her and talking through her feelings rather than implementing the consequence chart Jennifer had created, she forced herself to stay in the kitchen and let him parent his way. These moments of restraint were excruciating because Jennifer was so accustomed to being the household expert on everything from child development to financial planning. Watching Michael handle situations differently than she would have, without being able to offer her input or improvements, felt like watching someone use the wrong tool for a job when she had the right one sitting right there. But something interesting started happening during those moments of forced silence. Jennifer began to notice that Michael's methods, while different from hers, often worked just as well or sometimes even better. When he sat with Chloe during her bedtime meltdown, instead of sending her to her room for a timeout, their daughter calmed down faster and seemed more secure afterward. When he took a more relaxed approach to household chores, the atmosphere in their home felt less tense and stressful. "Maybe my way isn't always the best way," Jennifer admitted reluctantly to herself, after watching Michael successfully negotiate a compromise with Chloe about cleaning up her toys. His approach had been gentler and more collaborative than the firm directives Jennifer typically used, and it had achieved the same result with much less drama. Jennifer also started deliberately looking for things about Michael that she could appreciate rather than constantly cataloging his shortcomings. This felt almost impossible at first, because her brain had become so trained to spot problems and areas for improvement. But she forced herself to notice when he worked late to provide for their family, when he patiently helped Chloe with her homework, when he remembered to take out the garbage without being reminded. More challenging still was learning to express that appreciation out loud. Jennifer had gotten into the habit of taking Michael's positive contributions for granted, while immediately commenting on anything he did wrong. Now she made herself say thank you when he loaded the dishwasher, even though he arranged the plates differently than she preferred. She told him she appreciated how hard he worked to support their family, even when she sometimes wished he would spend more time at home. The changes were subtle at first, and Michael seemed almost suspicious of Jennifer's new approach. When she thanked him for fixing Chloe's broken tricycle instead of suggesting he should have done it sooner, he gave her a puzzled look as if he was waiting for the criticism that usually followed. When she complimented his handling of a difficult situation with one of his teenage clients, instead of offering advice about alternative approaches, he seemed genuinely surprised. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked one evening after Jennifer had praised his decision to take Chloe to the park instead of insisting she clean her room first. "You seem different lately." Jennifer wanted to explain everything she'd been thinking about their marriage, but she sensed that Michael wasn't ready for that conversation yet. "I'm just trying to appreciate the things you do for our family," she said simply. "I don't think I've been very good at that lately." Michael studied her face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trap. "Well, thanks," he said finally. "That means a lot." The real test of Jennifer's new approach came in October, when Michael's consulting practice hit a rough patch. Two of his biggest clients decided to handle their employee counseling services in-house, which meant a significant drop in his monthly income right as they were heading into the expensive holiday season. Jennifer could see the stress in Michael's shoulders, in the way he stared at his laptop screen late into the evening, in how distracted he seemed during family dinners. The old Jennifer would have immediately jumped into problem-solving mode. She would have researched marketing strategies for his business, suggested networking events he should attend, maybe even hinted that he should look for a more stable job with better benefits. She would have offered to take on more hours at school or pick up tutoring work to help with their finances. In her mind, these would have been helpful, supportive actions. But Jennifer was beginning to understand that her help often felt like criticism to Michael. When she offered solutions to his problems, she was inadvertently communicating that she didn't trust him to handle the situation himself. When she jumped in to fix things, she was essentially telling him that she saw him as incompetent. Instead, she focused on expressing genuine appreciation for how hard Michael worked to provide for their family, even during difficult times. "I know you're worried about the business," she told him one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "But I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you do to take care of us. You work so hard, and I never want you to feel like I don't notice that." Michael looked up from loading the dishwasher with an expression Jennifer hadn't seen in years, vulnerability mixed with relief. "I am worried," he admitted. "I hate the thought that I might not be able to provide for you and Chloe the way you deserve." "You're such a good provider," Jennifer said, resisting every instinct to offer suggestions or solutions. "Even when things are challenging, you never stop trying to take care of us. That means everything to me." From a psychological perspective, what Jennifer was doing represented a fundamental shift in how she approached her marriage. Instead of trying to manage Michael's behavior or improve their relationship through discussion and analysis, she was creating an environment where respect and appreciation could flourish naturally. This approach works because it addresses men's core emotional needs in relationships. While women typically need to feel loved and cherished, men need to feel respected and trusted. When a wife consistently expresses gratitude for her husband's efforts, even when those efforts don't match her exact preferences, she's communicating that she values him as a person and trusts his judgment. This creates emotional safety, which allows his natural desire to please and protect his wife to emerge. Jennifer's decision to focus on her own happiness was equally important. She started taking better care of herself in small but meaningful ways. She began taking long baths with music she enjoyed instead of using every free moment to catch up on grading papers. She started reading novels for pleasure again, something she hadn't done since college. She took up yoga classes at the community center and went for walks by herself when she felt stressed. This wasn't easy because Jennifer felt guilty about focusing on her own needs when her marriage was struggling. It seemed selfish to spend time on activities she enjoyed when there were so many problems that needed addressing. But she was starting to understand that becoming a happier, more balanced person might actually make her a better wife and mother. The changes in Jennifer's demeanor were noticeable almost immediately. She found herself laughing more easily, feeling less irritated by small household problems, and actually enjoying conversations with Michael about topics that had nothing to do with their relationship or Chloe's needs. When she wasn't constantly monitoring and critiquing Michael's behavior, she had mental and emotional energy available for other things. Michael began to respond to these changes in ways that surprised them both. He started seeking out Jennifer's company in the evenings instead of retreating to his study immediately after dinner. He began asking for her opinion on work situations, not because he needed her to solve his problems, but because he valued her perspective and wanted to share his thoughts with her. One particularly memorable evening in November, Michael came home from work and found Jennifer in the kitchen, dancing to music while she prepared dinner. Instead of walking past her to check his email or asking about Chloe's homework, he came up behind her and put his arms around her waist, swaying with her to the rhythm. It was the first spontaneous physical affection they'd shared in months, and Jennifer felt her heart flutter the way it had when they were first dating. "You seem happy," Michael murmured against her ear. "I am happy," Jennifer realized with surprise. "I think I'd forgotten what that felt like." But their most significant test was yet to come. In early December, the stress of his business struggles and the approaching holidays combined with Michael's tendency toward anxiety to create what could only be described as an emotional breakdown. Jennifer came home from work one afternoon to find him sitting at their kitchen table with his head in his hands, papers scattered around him, looking completely overwhelmed. "I can't do this anymore," he said without looking up. "I'm failing at everything. My business, providing for you and Chloe, being the husband and father you both deserve. Maybe you'd be better off without me." Every instinct Jennifer had screamed at her to take control of the situation. She wanted to gather up the financial papers, make lists of action steps, call his doctor about anxiety medication, research business recovery strategies. The old Jennifer would have immediately begun managing Michael's crisis the same way she managed everything else in their household. Instead, she sat down beside him and said something that surprised them both. "You're not failing at anything. You're the man who works 16-hour days because you want to take care of your family. You're the father who helps Chloe with her homework every night even when you're exhausted. You're the husband who still brings me coffee in bed on Saturday mornings. You haven't failed, you're just going through a difficult time." Michael looked at her with tears in his eyes. "But what if I can't turn the business around? What if I can't provide for you the way I want to?" Jennifer took his hands in hers and looked directly into his eyes. "Then we'll figure it out together. But I have complete faith in you. You've never given up on anything important in your life, and you're not going to start now." This response illustrates a crucial principle about supporting men during vulnerable moments. When a man is struggling, his deepest fear is often that he's inadequate as a protector and provider. If his wife responds by taking over, managing the situation, or treating him like he needs to be rescued, she inadvertently confirms his worst fears about himself. But when she responds with faith in his character and confidence in his ability to handle the challenge, she gives him the emotional strength to keep fighting. The conversation that followed was the most honest and intimate they'd had in years. Michael talked about his fears, his dreams for their family, and how much pressure he felt to be perfect. Jennifer shared her own insecurities about whether she was a good wife and mother, her struggles with wanting to control everything, and how lonely she'd been feeling in their marriage. "I've been so focused on trying to make everything perfect that I forgot to just enjoy being married to you," Jennifer admitted. "I lost sight of all the reasons I fell in love with you in the first place. I pulled away because I felt like I could never do anything right," Michael said. "Every suggestion felt like criticism. Every piece of advice felt like you were telling me I wasn't good enough. I know you were trying to help, but it made me feel like you didn't trust me or respect my judgment." For the first time in years, they were both being completely vulnerable with each other, sharing their fears and hurts without trying to prove who was right or wrong. It felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. The weeks following Michael's breakdown marked a turning point that neither Jennifer nor Michael had seen coming. Instead of the crisis driving them further apart, it seemed to strip away all the pretense and defensiveness that had been poisoning their relationship for years. Michael, humbled by his moment of complete vulnerability, began to see Jennifer's recent changes not as a temporary strategy, but as a genuine transformation in how she approached their marriage. "Thank you for not trying to fix me," he told her one evening as they sat together on their living room couch, Chloe finally asleep after a particularly energetic bedtime routine. "I know how hard it must have been to watch me fall apart and not jump in with a 10-point plan to solve everything, but what you did instead, just believing in me, that's what I actually needed." Jennifer felt tears sting her eyes because she realized how close she'd come to doing exactly what he described. Her teacher instincts had been screaming at her to create action items, research solutions, and basically manage Michael's recovery the way she'd manage a struggling student's academic plan. Resisting those impulses had been one of the hardest things she'd ever done, but also one of the most important. The shift in their relationship accelerated after that conversation. Michael started sharing details about his work that he'd been keeping to himself for months. He told Jennifer about difficult clients, business decisions he was wrestling with, and ideas he had for expanding his practice. He wasn't asking her to solve his problems. He was simply including her in his thoughts and trusting her with his concerns. Jennifer, for her part, found herself genuinely interested in Michael's perspective on things rather than immediately formulating her own opinions about what he should do. When he mentioned that one of his teenage clients was struggling with family issues, instead of suggesting therapeutic approaches he should try, Jennifer asked questions about how the situation was affecting him emotionally and what he found most challenging about the case. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to just talk with you," Michael said after one of these conversations. "Not about logistics or schedules or problems that need solving, but just talking, about ideas and feelings and what we think about things." The change in their parenting dynamic was equally dramatic. Without the constant battle of competing expertise, they began working together as a team in ways they hadn't since Chloe was a baby. When their daughter had a meltdown about wearing her winter coat to school, Jennifer found herself naturally stepping back and letting Michael handle the situation his way. To her amazement, his gentle approach of acknowledging Chloe's feelings while still maintaining the boundary about appropriate winter clothing worked beautifully. "I don't know why I thought there was only one right way to handle everything," Jennifer confided to her sister during one of their phone calls. "Michael's approach with Chloe is actually really effective. She listens to him and wants to cooperate because she doesn't feel like she's being controlled or criticized. I was making everything so much more difficult than it needed to be." This realization helped Jennifer understand something crucial about respect in marriage. When a wife trusts her husband's judgment and supports his decisions, even when she might handle things differently, she's not being weak or passive. She's being strategic. By creating an environment where her husband feels competent and valued, she's encouraging him to step up and take more responsibility. Men tend to rise to the occasion when they feel trusted, but they often withdraw and let their wives handle everything when they feel constantly criticized and second-guessed. The physical intimacy returned so gradually that Jennifer almost didn't notice it at first. It started with Michael reaching for her hand while they watched television together after Chloe's bedtime. Then came longer hugs when he arrived home from work, playful touches while they cooked dinner together, and eventually, passionate kisses that reminded Jennifer of their early dating days. But it wasn't just the return of physical affection that marked their healing, it was the quality of their emotional connection. They started having conversations that lasted long into the evening, sharing thoughts and dreams they hadn't talked about in years. Michael told Jennifer about his vision for his practice, his hopes for Chloe's future, and his gratitude for having a family to work so hard for. Jennifer shared her own dreams about maybe writing a novel someday, her thoughts about what kind of mother she wanted to be, and how much she'd missed feeling like Michael's partner rather than his manager. "It's like we're falling in love all over again," Jennifer told her mother during a weekend visit to their cabin near Brainerd. "But it's different this time because we know each other so much better. We've been through hard things together and come out stronger." When they finally made love again, it felt like a reunion between two people who had found their way back to each other after being lost. There was a tenderness and intimacy that had been missing for years, a sense of genuine connection that went far beyond the physical act itself. Jennifer found herself crying afterward, not from sadness but from relief and gratitude, that they had somehow managed to save what she'd been afraid was irretrievably broken. Michael's business began to recover as well, though whether that was due to improved economic conditions or his renewed confidence and energy was impossible to say. He landed 2 new corporate contracts in January and started getting referrals from other psychologists in the Twin Cities area. More importantly, he seemed to approach his work with renewed enthusiasm, rather than the grim determination that had characterized his efforts during the difficult months. Chloe noticed the changes in her parents' relationship and responded with improved behavior of her own. Without the tension and underlying conflict that had characterized their household for so long, she became more cooperative, more affectionate, and more secure. She started including both parents in her games and conversations, instead of unconsciously playing them against each other or seeking comfort from whichever parent seemed less stressed. "Mommy and Daddy are being nice to each other again," Chloe announced one Saturday morning as the 3 of them made pancakes together, flour covering every surface of their kitchen and jazz music playing in the background. Jennifer and Michael looked at each other and laughed, realizing that their daughter had perfectly captured what had changed. They weren't just 3 people who happened to live in the same house anymore. They were a family that genuinely enjoyed being together. From an expert perspective, what happened in Jennifer and Michael's marriage illustrates several key principles about creating lasting change in relationships. First, sustainable transformation happens when one person decides to change their own behavior consistently, without demanding immediate reciprocation or keeping score of the other person's responses. Jennifer didn't wait for Michael to become more appreciative before she started expressing gratitude. She didn't require him to be more affectionate before she stopped being critical. She simply decided to become the wife she wanted to be, regardless of how he responded initially. Second, respect and appreciation function like emotional oxygen for men in relationships. When a man feels genuinely valued and trusted by his wife, his natural instincts to protect, provide, and please her are activated. This isn't about outdated gender roles or traditional expectations. It's about understanding how to create an environment where both partners can contribute their best to the relationship without feeling defensive or inadequate. Third, crisis can become catalyst when it's handled with wisdom and faith rather than fear and control. Michael's breakdown could easily have destroyed their marriage if Jennifer had responded by taking over completely, panicking about their future, or treating him like he was incapable of handling adult responsibilities. Instead, she used it as an opportunity to demonstrate her faith in his character and her commitment to their partnership. This response not only helped Michael recover more quickly, but it also revealed a side of Jennifer that he'd never seen before: strong, supportive, and deeply loyal. Fourth, physical intimacy is almost always a reflection of emotional intimacy. When couples are battling for control, criticizing each other's judgment, or living in a state of chronic tension, sexual connection becomes nearly impossible. The body responds to emotional safety, and without that foundation, physical passion typically withers. But when respect, appreciation, and emotional security are restored, physical desire usually follows naturally. Finally, the changes in Jennifer and Michael's marriage weren't just temporary improvements brought on by the drama of crisis and reconciliation. Months later, they were still enjoying a level of connection and happiness that exceeded even their honeymoon period. They had learned how to navigate disagreements without making each other wrong, how to support each other during stressful times, and how to maintain their individual identities while still functioning as a strong partnership. The key difference was that Jennifer had stopped trying to change Michael and started focusing on becoming the person she wanted to be within their marriage. This shift from external control to internal growth created space for Michael to step up and become the husband he'd always wanted to be, but had felt too criticized and constrained to express. "I used to think marriage was about finding someone who thought exactly like you do," Jennifer reflected one evening as she and Michael took a walk around their neighborhood, following the same route where she'd once cried over the state of their relationship. "Now I realize it's about learning to respect and appreciate someone precisely because they bring different strengths to your life. Michael sees things I miss, handles situations in ways I wouldn't think of, and brings qualities to our family that I simply don't have. Instead of trying to change him into a version of me, I get to enjoy being married to him." Michael squeezed her hand and smiled. "I love that you trust me to figure things out now, even when I'm struggling or uncertain. It makes me want to be the best husband and father I can be, not because I have to prove myself, but because I want to take care of the people I love." Their story serves as a powerful reminder that marriages don't have to stay broken just because they've been damaged. With patience, wisdom, and the courage to change what's actually within our control, even the most distant and conflicted relationships can be transformed into sources of joy, support, and deep satisfaction. For couples struggling with similar dynamics of mutual criticism and emotional distance, Jennifer and Michael's journey offers both hope and practical guidance. The path forward doesn't require expensive therapy, dramatic confrontations, or complex negotiations about who needs to change what. It simply requires one person, often the wife, to courageously choose a different way of relating, trusting that respect and appreciation have the power to heal even the deepest wounds and restore even the most damaged connections. The transformation began with Jennifer's willingness to examine her own behavior honestly and take responsibility for her part in their relationship's deterioration. It continued with her commitment to expressing gratitude and appreciation even when she didn't feel like it initially. And it culminated in her choosing faith over fear during Michael's most vulnerable moment, demonstrating the kind of partnership and loyalty that makes a man want to fight for his marriage rather than give up on it. Today, Jennifer and Michael Walsh are proof that love isn't just a feeling, It's a choice that can be made new every day, even after years of distance and disappointment. Their marriage is stronger now than it was in the beginning because they've learned how to bring out the best in each other rather than constantly pointing out what needs to be fixed. They've discovered that happiness in marriage comes not from having a perfect partner, but from becoming the kind of person who creates an environment where love can flourish.